Welcome to Venice. It's the city of bridges, with water canals for roads and gondolas instead of taxis. It's so famous it attracts around 30 million tourists a year. That's roughly 600 times more than the number of people that actually live here. And while this is the Venice you might think of, this is actually what Venice looks like now. It's experiencing some of its worst flooding in decades. Italian officials say the situation is getting worse the more Venice sinks and sea levels rise. But wait, how is an entire city sinking? Well, to understand that, we need to go back a bit. Venice sits on 118 little islands in this big lagoon, about 1 metre above sea level. And creating it around 1,000 years ago took some doing. The city was built on top of millions of super long wooden piles that they hammered into the soft mud. Then on top of these, they built platforms. Sort of like a jetty, except with way more wood. Because they were buried so deep in the mud and without oxygen, the wood actually absorbed minerals in the water, turning it hard like concrete. Super sturdy and cool. Or so they thought. Eventually, the Venetians decided to drill some water wells deep underground. But after a while, people suspected the holes in the ground were causing the city to sink, so they stopped all of that. But Venice still seems to be slowly sinking. And there's another problem. The water around Venice is rising. Venice is affected by tides from the Adriatic Sea, and those tides are what cause the floods. They happen almost every year, and sometimes they're massive. When the tide rises really high in Venice, it's known as an acqua alta, or high water. An exceptional storm tide is anything over 1.4 metres. But let's put on our thinking caps for a moment. If we can't stop it from sinking, is there a way we can stop it from flooding? Well, the Italian government's already thought of that. This is called the Moes project. It's a series of 78 massive underwater gates that can rise to the surface when a storm tide is expected, basically acting as a temporary wall to keep the water out. They started planning it more than 30 years ago, and it'll probably end up costing over $11 billion. It's had tons of setbacks and it's still not completed. But some people worry that when it is done, it might not even work that well. The gates would have to be up a lot because sea levels are rising, and city officials say that that's set to get a whole lot worse with climate change. And while big tides cause problems for Venice, regular tides are actually really important. They help flush out the lagoon by getting rid of its waste. If the gates are up all the time, that won't happen. So the government's looking at other ways to help protect the World Heritage Site. The flooding hasn't stopped millions from visiting, with many using huge cruise ships in the small canals, which also damage the city's foundations. So many people visit, the Mayor of Venice is actually bringing in an entry fee for tourists. That money could go towards helping solve some of the city's problems. But for now, Venice has a big cleanup ahead.